Welcome to the TK Show with the Athletic Bay Area's Editor-in-Chief, Tim Kawakami.
Hey everybody, Tim Kawakami here, TK Show, broadcasting or recording or whatever we're doing from downtown Oakland. Nice little office here. We got a nice little setup. Hope maybe we'll keep doing this. And as my special guest today, someone whose name keeps popping up. I just turn on the radio and you hear his name because of everything that's going on in New England, in the National Football League, everything around what we're discussing right now. A friend of mine, great reporter from ESPN, Seth Wickersham. Seth, your name just now is kind of a thing. Something happens with the Patriots and go, oh my goodness, I wonder what Wickersham's going to think about this. What's that like? What's it been like the last few days with the Malcolm Butler, with the Josh McDaniels taking the Indianapolis job and then going right back and deciding he's not taking the Indianapolis job and maybe there's some succession with Belichick? We'll get into all those details, but I'm just listening to, Le Batard show. They bring up you. The other people bring up you. What's that like after, of course, you wrote that epic story on the potential end of the Patriots dynasty?
I mean, fortunately, I don't spend all day glued to the radio or the television, so I missed most of it. I'm sure that, all of my all of my in-laws happen to be Patriots fans, and they live in Boston. And so, I think it's more amusing for them. For a while, my brother-in-law was like keeping track and texting me. He's like, in his 50s and he's a lawyer and he shouldn't have this much time on his hands, but he was texting me updates all the time. And I eventually was like, I can kind of do without this, if that's okay.
So as you watch this, I guess I'll ask you, when the story drops, was like January 4th, something like that, as the playoffs were beginning. Obviously, there was a storm and there was a reaction. Have you heard anything just from your sources that maybe add some context to what you basically wrote in fantastic detail these tensions that have built up between probably Brady and Belichick and Robert Kraft and how this might be coming to an end? Just as this story has developed, any further context to this, any further details that you can add? Just maybe the story itself maybe propelled some of this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, none of the sources, regretted talking to me or regretted anything that they said. And I was working on it over a course of 2 months. And so, I felt like I had time to get a very well-rounded impression of what was going on. And the main question I kept asking people, like, is this still going on? Is this still a thing? Has anything changed? Meaning the tension that was in the building. And every time the answer was the same. Nope, nothing's changed. And, so because of that, I felt very comfortable writing the story. And, I was a little bit amused that the Patriots had this statement that came out saying there was no tension a day after the story. And then, pretty soon Ian Rappaport was reporting that Brady, Belichick, and Kraft are going to meet to resolve these issues. And then Robert Kraft, before the playoffs, acknowledges on the record that there's tension. And then, he says Brady and Belichick have got to get their egos in check. And then in the Super Bowl, even the lead up to the Super Bowl, he was on the record talking about how there's tension. And so I've done enough of these stories that sort of get it. I try to get inside the building as best I can. And, there's usually a blowback, and then things settle down and the truth ends up coming out. And I feel good about it.
No, it was a great story. I said at the time, it just kind of it sets up every other conversation we're going to have about the Patriots for the next year or two or maybe longer, and it kind of sets that whole, I think, the whole run in a different sort of light. Just from what you saw at the Super Bowl, what you know about the changes that we know are coming. Just as you watch that, is this just all fitting the pattern that you've seen? Has there been anything that's happened that you went, whoa, that's a little different?
Well, I never thought that Belichick or Brady wouldn't be back next year. Now, people in the building did. And so, that's how I wrote it, because they're in there and that's what they're witnessing and feeling. My personal opinion was I thought that they would figure out a way to get this thing worked out. And, it appears that's going to be the case. We'll see. I do think that Josh McDaniels had a lot of leverage, honestly, against the Patriots. It was a very extreme and odd situation. But I think that who was going to run the offense was a big deal, because I do think that if Josh had left, there was a chance that other people on offense were either going to go with him or retire. And then the question became, well, who is going to run the offense? Who will Tom Brady trust? Who can manage Tom Brady? It's not easy. And I think that Belichick could have, but I think that there's enough tension there that I don't know if it really would have worked out. And so I think that the Patriots, Josh McDaniels became a very important piece to their future, not only for the short term, but for the long term. And, what he did, I mean, that was just, it went against everything that he had told everybody for a month.
Do you think he can possibly walk away from an Indy job without a promise that he's going to follow Belichick with the Patriots?
No, I don't. But, I don't think that that's in writing. It would probably violate the Rooney Rule if it did, or at least violate the spirit. Yeah, violate the spirit of it. But I think that, I think Josh has told people, there's going to be other opportunities. And I think that a lot of these coaches who had already planned on moving to Indianapolis are pretty frustrated with him at the moment.
So what is the relationship with McDaniels and Belichick then? I mean, there's so many different ways to look at this, but that's one I haven't really seen much on. Are they? And I don't know that Belichick's buddies with anybody, but are they colleagues? Are they partners in this? What's that relationship like?
I think there's something more than colleagues. I wouldn't say they're friends. I mean, these guys spend so much time around each other. It's not like they necessarily need to spend more with each other outside of the practice facility. But I think that and ESPN reported today that, Belichick is going to try to be more of a mentor to Josh and open up and explain why he makes a lot of these decisions. It's one of the most fascinating aspects of things in New England is, one of the reasons why a lot of Belichick's assistants have struggled on their own is because just because Belichick has taught them everything that they know about football, it doesn't mean that Belichick has taught them everything that he knows about football. And with a lot of these situations, that he doesn't feel the need to explain the rationale behind every single personnel move and get into debates. And, a lot of these guys are in the dark. And I think that there was a great moment in the 30 for 30 about Parcells and Belichick where Belichick talked about how grateful he was that Parcells opened up and let him see why things were going on and gave him glimpses of the view of being a head coach. And I think he's going to start doing that with Josh.
Is this Kraft dictating much of this, or is this Belichick?
I think he had a huge piece of it, huge piece. I mean, I think that it was mostly him, to be honest with you. And I think that, I think that a lot of the issues that are in New England stem from decisions that Robert Kraft has made. But I think that nobody can deny that this guy can close, and he closed with Josh yesterday.
Is this a 1-year thing? I mean, we can get in. We're going to get in the Garoppolo thing, as you know, for sure. But they've got a 40-year-old quarterback. Going to be 41 next year. Are they keeping McDaniels just to maintain a 41-year-old quarterback? That's the Kraft plan, or I assume they're going to add a young quarterback? But that seems pretty short term, even when you're keeping a young coach for a 41-year-old quarterback. Do you see what I'm saying? Isn't there a little disconnect there?
There absolutely is, and I don't know what the answer is. I think they're going to pay him like a young head coach, and I think he'll be able to leave if he wants to. And when Belichick walks away, I think the presumption is that, Josh is the heavy favorite for that job. But I think that, I think there's people who believe that, it's Josh and Nick Caserio are going to be running the Patriots in a couple of years, if not 1 year. I think that we'll see, but I definitely think that this move was necessary to try to help things in the building.
And where's Brady in this? Would he be saying, keep Josh? Would that be his push for this?
I don't know, honestly. I think it was a hard year for him, and I think that, I think that him and Josh have had their issues, but I think their relationship is good, and I'm sure that, I'm sure that of all the scenarios, this is probably one that Brady appreciated. I don't know if he had much of a say in it per se, but I think that he is probably happy that Josh is back. If it's that or having to have a new coordinator.
Well, let's get to the Garoppolo question, which is the one where I started with this. I never really understood that trade. I mean, you've detailed it. The the way this, I mean, and they've denied certain little tiny things, which leaves the questions even more open. In if you're even halfway aware of how you actually deny things, where Kraft says, "I didn't order him to trade him." Of course, he could have, but he could have indicated that that's the way they're going, or could have done a whole other subtle things. But how do you think
it's
this?
Semantic.
Yeah, how do you think this came down just to make it for a second-round pick? That's the part I keep going back. I keep saying that, why didn't they ask for Reuben Foster? Why didn't they ask for DeForest Buckner? Why didn't they ask for 2 twos? Ask for a 1. Ask for something. From what you've heard, how does this all happen for only a second-round pick?
I think that Bill Belichick liked Jimmy Garoppolo a lot and was personally invested in him in ways that he isn't with a lot of players. I mean, even after the trade, you saw him go on and on about how great he thought Garoppolo was, which is very rare for a player that Belichick parts ways with. And I think that look, they traded 2 quarterbacks in a 2-month span with a 40-year-old who was on the injured, the weekly injury report, for the team that more than any other is shrewd and ruthless about its long-term thinking. It just made no sense. And when they traded Jacoby Brissett in September, it was an endorsement on Garoppolo. And I think that what happened was that Brady made it clear that he wanted to keep playing. I think that Kraft felt like there was no way that they were going to part ways with Tom Brady. And because of that, I don't think he felt like he wanted to pay both players. Now, I think there was a scenario in which Garoppolo could have been franchised and Brady could have been there. And, the Patriots planned for all of these things. But because Kraft made it clear that Garoppolo was not going to be part of the team's long-term planning, it was clear that there was a mandate to trade him. And from then on, I think Bill picked exactly what he wanted. And, he's had a lot of respect for Mike Shanahan over the years. And he didn't know Kyle very well, but they met at the Combine in Indianapolis last year, only weeks after Kyle had been on that coaching staff that had blown that historic lead. And I think that it really impressed Bill Belichick that Kyle was willing to open up and undergo that autopsy so soon. And he wanted Garoppolo to do well, and he's taken pride in how well Garoppolo has played in San Francisco. And so one morning, he texted Kyle Shanahan asking him to call him, and when they finally connected, he asked if he'd be interested in Garoppolo for a second rounder. That was it.
That is still amazing, and I can imagine what the reaction that Kyle Shanahan and John Lynch made. Do you think? I'm asking you to peer into the minds of everybody, but you're as good at that as anybody with the reporting you've done. Do you think Kyle Shanahan knew that this was a possibility, just going back to the relationship that's, as you mentioned, started at the Combine last year?
I don't know that for a fact, but I'm going to guess no. I mean, I don't think that anybody saw it coming. I think that, you have Michael Lombardi, who's one of Belichick's longtime personnel men, who's now in the media, just talking about how great Garoppolo was and how Bill did not want to trade him. And I think that I don't think Bill planned on trading him. And so, no, I don't think that there was ever an inkling that – I think that last year when they were looking at Josh McDaniels and Nick Caserio, was there a chance that could open the door to Garoppolo? I think that was a scenario a year ago. But when Kyle Shanahan was there, no, I don't think so.
You've mentioned how Garoppolo was a younger player, and he certainly had more in common with the younger players on the Patriots roster than 40-year-old Tom Brady, who's a world icon. As these players are watching Garoppolo do what he did for the 49ers, was there questions, confusion over all this in the Patriots organization?
Well, I mean, of course there were. I mean, it was a shock to everybody. It was a shock to us. Like I said, when they traded Jacoby Brissett, that was a tacit endorsement that Garoppolo was going to be there for a while. They had no plans to part ways with him, and Bill had never wavered in his conviction that he didn't want to trade him. And so I think that everybody was shocked. I also think that, because it happened during the bye week for New England, I think that it probably helped them, move past it a little bit because, whatever questions they had a couple days to sort of stew over them, and then as it's business as usual there.
Yeah. Again, asking you to peer into the mirror through the into the dimensions of the Patriots. But what do you think next year is like? Is it just kind of like what we just saw? Are there changes? Do they look different? What do you think? Assuming all these guys stay there and Kraft is apparently open up his pocketbook to make sure McDaniels stays. What do you think the next year or so is like with the Patriots?
I don't know. You have Gronk talking about retirement. You have this question of Brady and whether, there are, of course, rumors that he might consider just walking away. I think it's unlikely, but, I think that some of the people who talk about it are very well-sourced people. I think that, there's going to be a different roster. So, I think that that the Patriots their nucleus is going to be there with the exception of Gronk. But, you look at them playing the Eagles, for instance, and I mean, at what position are they clearly better than the Eagles in that entire roster?
Yep.
And you look and you say, well, tight end and quarterback.
Yep.
And, maybe pass rush in certain places or whatever. But, that they just do a phenomenal job of coaching, and they have a quarterback who can read any coverage. And, the question is, like, how long can that go on? And that'll be the interesting question next year.
How does Belichick want to end this? Is it on riding off on the sunset with a Lombardi? Is it how does he just give us a picture of what he everyone says, oh, this is how Belichick wants to leave. How do you think he wants to leave this?
I don't know. I think that he wants to make sure that his sons are taken care of, and I think what he wanted to do was leave the team set up at quarterback. Walsh didn't quite leave the 49ers set up at quarterback. I mean, Montana still had another year or two. But, I think he wanted to oversee that transition. Now, will he actually do it? I don't know at this point. But I think that, and at the end of the day, I think that he doesn't know what else he would get more fulfillment doing.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think he's eager to leave, but there's no question that during this season, especially around the Garoppolo trade, frustrations were so high that people in the building definitely thought that he was considering leaving after the season.
How close do you think the 49ers got to hiring Josh McDaniels last year, by the way?
The Niners?
Yeah.
I thought they got very close. I mean, I think that they have to think, hey, look, it's not just us.
Yep.
And I think that Josh got cold feet. And, we always look for another reason as to why. Well, why really was it? Was it because of the roster or whatever, what was it? And I think that he got cold feet, and I think that he got cold feet again. And it's a very interesting psychological discussion that, once some more details come out about what's happened the last 24 hours, a lot of people will dive into, because here is somebody who's one of the most aggressive football coaches in the business, and he is very risk averse outside of it. And I think that a lot of it had to do with Denver and not wanting to put his family through another situation that could end prematurely. But I don't know exactly how the Crafts turned him on this. I mean, he had agreed to a deal in principle a month ago. And, the Colts had spent a year essentially courting him in various ways. I think that they tried to reset the relationship with Belichick with the Jacoby Brissett trade, for instance. And so that's the question, how close did they come? I think they were very close last year. And, I'm sure that in a weird way they can relate to what the Colts went through this week, where, you have your head coach that you think, but you can't announce it and he can't sign, and you're terrified that he might say no.
Yep.
And that's what happened to the Colts.
Seth, we were talking all Patriots, but I know you know tons about the NFL. You've been around the 49ers. How do you think they have if they've got Garoppolo, if they got Kyle Shanahan, just from what you know from people around the league, do they really, like the outside people might be pointing to, this thing might be looking pretty good? Do you get that same sense about them from inside the NFL and from what you've seen?
Yeah, I think that it was a good year for the 49ers in a lot of ways. I think at the top, you have Jed York, who I think emerged. Everybody's wondering, who is going to be leading the room of owners when Jerry Jones and, McNair and all these, even Kraft and all these guys are gone. And I think that Jed took a step towards that with the stance he took and some of the anthem stuff. I mean, that it helped him in the building, that he was unequivocal, that they were free to express themselves. And I think that he was one of the guys that didn't back down. And I think that mattered in the locker room. I think that they clearly have a head coach. I mean, you look at the Atlanta Falcons when Kyle Shanahan was coaching them 2 years ago, and every receiver was wide open. Mm-hmm. And you look at the Atlanta Falcons this past year, and receivers really weren't wide open. And you look at the San Francisco 49ers, and their receivers, who shouldn't even be in the NFL mostly, were pretty open. And then I think that obviously you look at the quarterback, and I mean, he was just on fire. They did a phenomenal job of coaching him, and he did a phenomenal job of playing, considering I don't think he knows. I think they were playing versions of Kyle's offense and versions of the Patriots. Like, it wasn't the full Kyle Shanahan playbook that they were using. And so it's crazy, but in 1 year, even in less than 1 year, like half the season from the trading deadline on, and just because of things that have happened elsewhere, you've seen the Cardinals are clearly in rebuilding mode. The Seahawks, they're going to be a tough out, but it's hard to see if they're a clear playoff team anymore. And you have, a rivalry with two young coaches and two young quarterbacks with LA and San Francisco. So that's good for the NFL. So generally speaking, I think it's been a good couple months for the 49ers.
Let's get on that Jed conversation. And you've done so much work on the ownership stuff and Goodell. Who is that next wave of owners? Is it Jeffrey Lurie? Where can you point to? Jed York, you've mentioned. Stan Kroenke.
Well, the problem is just that, like, not a lot of these guys care. So you're not going through a pool of 32. You're going through more of like a pool of 14. And of those 14, some of them, aren't big personalities. And, they might care, but they're quiet people. And so it's really not that many people that you're looking at in terms of like who could be those next guys. And I think that York will be one of them, but I also think that they need to figure out a way to help the ownership of the NFL become a little bit more like the ownership of the NBA, where you have younger people in the room and people who look differently. And I think that, so I don't know exactly how that happens. I don't know if the Carolina Panthers are sold to someone younger, but that transition has to take place.
You've also written about the Raiders in Las Vegas. Is there any? Mark Davis has brought John Gruden in, and that is a lot of answers to a lot of different things. But is there worry within the league that this big Las Vegas thing might not be the firmest thing ever? I assume they're going to get there, but with the small population of Las Vegas, with the shaky, financial sensibility of the Raiders, anything in the league like, okay, this thing bears some watching a little bit.
Yeah, I think that they moved to an idea of Vegas that's antiquated, that was pre-2008 Vegas. And I know that there are people who are very smart people in the NFL who will say, look, Oakland isn't as great of a market as it appears. I've spoken to enough people, and I think I disagree with that assumption. I think that a lot of owners didn't want to leave Oakland. Mm-hmm. I think they looked at it as sort of like the next Brooklyn. And, there's no way that the NFL, was fully endorsed leaving Oakland for Las Vegas. I think that, like, to a certain extent, they felt like their hands were tied, backed into a corner. You can go back and forth about who was right or wrong in the state of negotiations forever. That was just an ugly, ugly situation. But, California is a great football state. People talk about football declining around the country, but it's like if Florida, Louisiana, Texas, and California everyone's still playing, that's half the country. Mm-hmm. And the NFL it's just not a good situation in California. There's just no way to look at it. The Rams Stadium is a year late. There's going to be serious questions about how much revenue is there for them. Do these things live up to the projections? The Chargers kind of defaulted to LA. Nobody's excited about them being there. They have no story to tell. The Niners are the bright spot. And, the Rams obviously on the field are a bright spot because they did well, but there's still big questions about the NFL, LA's appetite for the NFL. And so leaving a hungry place like Oakland with a great fan base, great location, thriving place, I still think that there's a lot of people who wish that could have turned out differently.
Could the league try to go back into Oakland?
They could, but I think the problems are still there. And it's like, once you leave, I don't know how easy it is to come back. I don't know if the city of St. Louis is dying for another NFL team right now.
I think Oakland would take the Raiders no matter what Mark Davis does, but that's probably down the road. They've already proven that, right? They've proven they'll take the Raiders back with a Davis who has moved them. They'll take it back. Well, I could talk to you forever about this. Other stories you've written just keep popping in my head, but I won't take. I don't think we're going to do it 2 hours with Seth. I'm going to let you go with 25 minutes. But this has been a great conversation. I will end this with the question I ask almost all my guests. Sometimes I forget. Is Seth, what's your favorite restaurant?
My favorite restaurant is PJ Clark's in New York.
Okay.
So, when I was in college, I studied all the great sports writers, and I love Dan Jenkins. And the back of his famous novel, Semi-Tough, his author picture is a picture of him in front of PJ Clark. So when I was in college, I went there, and I sat in the Sinatra booth, and it's just you don't get. New York has a tendency to refurbish itself pretty quickly. It's like you walk down the street and blocks are completely different than they were 5 years ago. And that's one of the few places that's a 2-story place. The cheeseburgers are unbelievable. They have the Sinatra table that has not moved. And, there's just very few places that are iconic like that, where Joe Namath and, all these, Frank Gifford and all these greats used to go and party. And so that's why it's my favorite.
That's a good one. I like it. I think you're the first one to mention that, and it's a great one. Well, listen, thank you for all the time. I booked you a couple days ago, and as events move it on, I said, my goodness, this is going to be a topical show, and I love those. And great to have you on. Hope to talk to you again, but thank you so much, Seth.
Thanks, man.
All right, everybody, Seth Wickersham, ESPN. Great conversation. That's TK Show for today. Thanks.